Welcome to The Middlemen. I'm Tom Limongello, and I'm here with Todd Sawicki. We, as middlemen, live at the intersection of media and e-commerce, and we would like for you to join us in our discussions where we turn that chaotic intersection into your comfort zone. So today we are going to talk with Matt Krepsik. Matt is someone that I worked with at Quotient. He came in as the CTO, quickly became the CEO, and it was great working with him. He was easily able to grapple with all the different parts of what Quotient was, because it was a lot of different parts. And he was great at explaining the vision for that. So it'll be interesting to hear his view on his new company, MediaRadar. So he is now the CEO of MediaRadar, which is a company that has both buy and sell side assets for basically advertising intelligence. And it's a part of the market that probably gets missed a lot in the space that we're in, the very performance heavy space. So I think it'll be a really interesting discussion.
I think one of the stories that continues to live on is Quotient. We're all going to look back and go, how the hell wasn't that a huge success? Given the people and the talent, right? You've got Matt, you've got so many people touch that business and have gone off to do some really amazing things. And Joe Dressler came from there, you came from there, and now Matt. It's amazing to see the talent that emerged from that company. Quotient had a great vision for retail media, and being early is still wrong, as we'll likely touch on and talk about. So many people out of that business are really contributing to meaningful ways to where the online ad business is going. And a big part of that is retail media and the rise of retail media. And I think Matt's story is, and where he's going, and MediaRadar in terms of what it is and what it's becoming in terms of some of the acquisitions. We all get introduced to MediaRadar from a sell-side support standpoint over the years, but it's quickly evolving in these cool ways.
I think what was true of Matt Krepsik has been that he's always looking at the underlying data assets and saying not specifically that the data has the value, but what you do with that data. He did that specifically with Gracenote back in the early days when audio content recognition on TVs was a nascent industry. And now you see the Vizios of the world becoming the focus of the retail media industry. So I think it'll be interesting to see with MediaRadar, what are the data assets that they have and how does he look at that as a way to drive a business? Hello, we are here with Matt Krepsik, somebody who I worked with at Quotient back from 2021 on. But before we get into business and where you are now, I wanted to figure out, are you still running 100-mile races?
I am still running 100-mile races. I still run ultra marathons. I do about 4 or 5 a year. Only 100 a year. It's hard on the body, but I'll do maybe a couple 50Ks, 100K, and then a 100-mile race.
You're insane. Like you and Brian, it's funny, it's because in the ad tech world or MarTech ad tech world, Brian Morrissey is also an ultra marathon. I think there's some other ones too. Do you guys like have a club and hang out together and like plan racing together?
You have to have a few screws loose to run 100 miles. It's number one, it's an eating competition to fuel.
Oh, yeah.
Number two, it's a mental competition because you're stuck with yourself in your own brain for 24 hours. And then the third part is that you do actually have to make it over 100 miles of terrain in the mountain.
So there's a CPG component to this? What is it? Liquid IV? What are you putting in? What are you fueling with?
That's a good question. I love gnarly nutrition out of Salt Lake City, and then Sour Patch Kids can be really good.
There you go.
Jelly Belly jelly beans can be really good. There's been some dark moments like miles 70, 3 a.m. and like you're just like housing a bunch of like Reese cups.
Oh man,
and they're so good. The things that your body just craves, it's unreal, and it's fantastic. It's fun.
Yeah, you wouldn't think you'd get to talk about junk food with somebody with as high a metabolism as you. I guess it's okay.
My athletic endeavor is playing ice hockey, and I thought goalies in hockey were nuts, and they are. They're certified insane.
They are
because they're getting beat on, and you're on an island as a goalie, and now I actually think you all ultra marathoners might be even crazier. Like it's a whole other category.
All right.
Crazy.
So we break you down so that we can build you up. So you came in as the CTO of Quotient in say 21. You quickly became the CEO, and you had something difficult to deal with. We have a really high traction in retail media, but then we're bundled with a lot of acquisitions and managed service. So you needed to do something there. So tell us a little bit about that story.
Yeah, I think Quotient was a combination of like a lot of really cool assets that had been brought together. It operated in a very interesting space in the marketplace. It probably was early to the game on retail media before retailers were even ready for it. I think what made Quotient really candidly a great company and great business was actually its promotions network. I think what the secret about Quotient was like it had this amazing kind of like coupons.com kind of promotion network. And it was really excellent and solid at building out that idea of being a network operator, driving offers and promotions to different consumers across any retailer that they shopped at. And in many ways, when you think about the world of retail media, unless you're a Walmart or Amazon and maybe a Kroger, you really don't have a lot of scale to be successful in the world of retail media. And I think the lesson that that I learned and took away from Quotient, it was just the power and benefit of that network. You can have good technology, you can have interesting software, you can have a robust services business or managed service business, and you run on relationships. But really thinking about how do you build out and scale that network model is really the way to unlock, in my view, like the opportunity in that space.
It's fascinating. We keep going back to the story of Quotient, and always like to talk about the idea that being early is still wrong. And right, it is this thing. And I think Quotient is one of those examples of you look where retail media is today in 24. Quotient, fast forward 3 to 5 years, you got to think Quotient would be one of the darlings of the space, given where they were. And it's one of these tragedies. Oh, they were so close to making it, but by being early, you were still wrong. And I look at that business and the rise of retail media, and there's other players out there. And then the flip side of that is you look at other players who've done well in retail media more recently. Kevel is a great example of a platform now focused on retail media, originally built for native advertising, started in, I think, 2011, right? It's not this
Mhm.
new thing that suddenly got there, but they happen to they focus on native advertising, and then suddenly, as they tell the story, 2018, 2019 starts happening. The beginnings of retail media start happening, and they realize, oh, it's actually built on native advertising, like promoted
Yeah.
listings or sponsored listings and sponsored recommendations are native ads, and suddenly you're there. And it's one of these things. And Criteo started retargeting and got into, which is had a big focus on native advertising. That allowed them to transition. And Quotient was ahead of both of them and is the one dead in the grave on the side of the road. And those two live on today.
Matt actually worked very closely with Megan Clarkin, who is running the ship over at Criteo. So you might actually have some better insights there.
Yeah, I don't have any deep dark secrets, but I think if as I think about the space, it's a combination of things that you have to get right to be successful. And I think you hit on one of them, which is like Todd, you talk about this, like how do you be strong at native advertising? Like how do you build the ad unit? And that's something. If I were to say like the dirty secret of retail media is that there is no media. And so one of the things that you have to bring to the table is like how do you actually execute and build ad inventory in native media. And if you think about some of the successful companies today, and even Criteo, it's helping the retailers build out their on-site or their native ad inventory. And how do you have the tools and technologies to do that? But equally, how do you also scale out that business and find incremental inventory in the open web to deliver and drive more traffic to the stores or drive more traffic to the websites and really better monetize that intelligence and that audience that retail media brings?
I think one of the fascinating things about where retail media is going, and we've talked about this, to exactly your point of they don't have traditional ad assets,
Yeah.
and publishers do, but they have first party data, which is fascinating and it turns out to be incredibly valuable, which is why retail media is taking off. And so one of
Yeah.
the arguments we're making, and right, we've talked with the founder of Best Buy Media, we've talked to others, and we see the future is retailers should be buying publishers. And then they can extend their first party data easily to any property they own because it's all first party. And I
Yeah.
think that's one of the interesting things. And it begins to look like they're going to have to end up in traditional media, like publishing. Suddenly, are we all back to building ad networks again from the ground
Yeah.
up? Like what was hot in 2006 is suddenly going to be hot in 2026.
What's old
The
is new
rise of
again.
the new ad network.
Oh yeah, I 100% believe in that view because the challenge that retail media networks have today is like, how do I drive traffic? And if you think about this, it's hard for a small retailer in the Northeast to drive enough traffic to monetize their audiences, right? So you think about retail media networks, they're a function of data, native assets and inventory, and then traffic. And so if you think about the role that ad networks played, ad networks were great at curating traffic, right? They're great at curating an overall advertising experience. And so
Well,
in
what
many
happened?
ways, it's going to be the Google pot double click. Yeah. We created one giant ad network called Google and the GDN display network. And so in many ways, if you think about the future of retail media, the future of retail media is like, how do you build an ad network at scale that really delivers a curated audience and a curated, native ad asset? Now, some of that might be retailers acquiring publishers. So that also might be saying, hey, is there a need in the marketplace for a true ad network that can really link together a lot of these high quality assets and audiences and build a very curated ecosystem at scale, right? To compete with GDN, to compete with the Amazons and Walmarts of the world.
I think that's
So,
fascinating. As we look to the things that were that, like Triad. Let's go back
Triad,
to the
yeah,
very that
yeah,
idea today would be you're like,
yeah,
oh
we
my god,
weren't the
that's amazing.
earliest.
Oh,
Actually, one thing we didn't mention from your background, which I think is probably important, is that you worked for a while. You really came up at Nielsen and you really were on the analytics side of the business. How does that sort of, we want to get to where you are today. How did that sort of color the way you look at a lot of this? And is that the reason why you're at MediaRadar today?
It's a good question. MediaRadar is an interesting one, but I would say, I'll get to that. The thing that I always loved about the world of like information services and data and analytics, I love data. I think data in many ways gives us insight in terms of what decisions to take, what actions we make. But I always found that a lot of data sets are they're just data. And what I love about analytics and predictive models is like, how do you put that data in motion? How do you have data tell a story? How do you have data inform an action or something we do? And if you think about even like today, the world of the buzzwords of AI and machine learning, a lot of what AI and machine learning really is training on data and putting that into motion, right? Telling something convincing or telling an interesting story and leveraging our knowledge to inform an action we take. And for me, what got attracted me to MediaRadar is probably one simple thing. Like I've spent a good chunk of my career in the advertising and the media space. And I remember always going to Cannes Lions in the south of France every summer. But what I loved about going to Cannes wasn't so much the meetings or all the events that occur there, but going into the basement and watching ads every morning. Put on a headphone, sit down there. They had the computers, and just looking at all the amazing creatives that were out there, and how, in many ways, that creative tells a story of how you link a brand to a consumer, right? And if I think about all of my work in the advertising and measurement space, we've always known and we've always seen that like 50% of the performance of every ad unit was actually driven by the creative, not the audience, not the publisher or the inventory or even the format. Was it a compelling creative that delivered a message that captivated consumers? And so when I had the opportunity to come to MediaRadar, what got me really excited was the fact that MediaRadar has probably the largest metadata base around creative assets in the US. MediaRadar is actually a combination of a few different companies that we've pulled together. One of them is MediaRadar, which had a lot of great experience and was built up on the sell side, supporting ad sales reps who are looking to go figure out like who is executing this amazing McDonald's creative on Facebook or TikTok or Pinterest, right? And so the nice thing about the MediaRadar side of the world is you support ad sales reps, and we're able to say, hey, here's where the advertiser is spending money on which platforms and which websites and what formats and how much they're spending. And by the way, here's who you go reach out to in terms of here's the brand manager or the agency or the creative who's actually executing that. And so that's how MediaRadar came up. The print space is where it really started looking at magazines and understanding what that share of voice was and how do you go find the next advertiser and get them to spend. If they're in a Condé Nast magazine, how do we get them in The Economist or whatever other magazine out you're thinking about and reading? And then we brought that together with some of the numerator assets that for a long time have been tracking creative, and then some of the Kantar Media ad intelligence assets. And so if you think about MediaRadar in its current incarnation, we really have three major kind of data sets that underpin our product base. One of those is what I mentioned earlier, which got me so excited to come here, which is our creative asset library, right? We classify thousands and thousands of ad units every day with 300 plus attributes for every ad unit. So we really can look at ads and classify them 15 to 20 different ways to help brands and creatives and agencies and publishers understand what the current kind of approach is for advertising today in the creative space. We marry that with a view of ad intelligence or spend. So how much are brands spending across which channels? What is our share of voice in the marketplace? And we do that from an omni-channel view. So it's across almost every major kind of media channel in the US. And the third piece we overlay that is our contacts database, which is it tells us our information around who are the movers and shakers and spenders in the industry. And so when you want to know, hey, who built this ad campaign at PepsiCo or who's executing this plan at WPP, we actually can start to connect the dots with not just the creative and the spend and the channel, but the actual buyers and movers and shakers of the industry. And so that gives us a really great opportunity to support the overall ecosystem of advertising from the moment you're selling a campaign as a publisher to the moment you're buying a campaign, planning that campaign, and even tracking your creative and understanding your performance in the marketplace.
That's really cool. I think for me, the most interesting thing there as you were talking was, is there a product vision for this as well? Because I think what you first started talking about in terms of having numerators, creative assets, that sort of reminded me of back in the day when we were trying to basically be like an in-house creative agency for these retailers. We would go to Moat and find the creative and Moat.com because they allowed you to just search their whole creative database. And then Facebook and Google started to have their own creative databases. But I feel like nobody's really gotten to the level of creative intelligence to
Yeah.
use that in any programmatic way. Is that sort of where you guys are
Oh,
going?
100%. If I think about where we're at today, like we are probably call it 9 months into bringing together these companies. And so as we bring them onto a common platform, instead of looking at linear TV ad in isolation of a social media ad, in isolation of a YouTube OTT type of ad unit, we actually now are saying, hey, we've now said a can of Coke on all those different platforms is still the same. A humorous ad on all those different platforms is still the same definition of humor. And so the first thing we've done is actually start to bring together a common definition of products and categories. Sounds really boring, but that common taxonomy allows us to make that holistic comparison regardless of the format, right? And then on top of that, it now starts to say we can start building more dynamic ads based on that information that we have there. If you think about this, we were messing around with our database a couple weeks ago before the holidays of saying, wait a second, what if I want to build a BMW ad for the winter? And we were able to say within just a very simple query using Dolly, build me a BMW ad for the winter based on all of our ad units and metadata. And I think we built like a print ad or something.
You should have done Jaguar. That might have gone a little further.
Oh, if we would have done Jaguar, we would have probably been ahead of the curve there and reached out to them and said, hey, maybe we want to rethink this brand design. But what was beautiful about that, or what was great about that, is it allowed us to actually very quickly pull together our knowledge of the time of the year, the industry, the category, and produce a dynamic ad within seconds. Does that mean it's going to be the final ad that goes to air? No, but at least in many ways it becomes that assisted intelligence that supports the creative agencies out there. It also allows us to identify like late breaking creative. So if you're a Tim Hortons and you want to keep pace with what's going on the breakfast menu, we actually understand pretty quickly in real time or in near real time in the morning, hey, Wendy's just launched a brand new breakfast menu campaign, or Burger King has a new value messaging, and how do we actually respond to that and stay ahead of the curve in terms of our advertising in the ecosystem. And so that idea of really understanding how things are changing in the ecosystem is incredibly valuable as well.
You actually jumped to the answer I was going to say with your data set. It's pretty obvious that it could be a great training data set for Gen AI, for creative, right? And you're sort of like, yeah, we're doing that, or you could be licensing that data out as a basis for training. Because I think one of the fascinating things that we're going to see also in terms of the AI space is, and you're seeing buzz about this, all the models have crawled the web and publicly available information. And once you crawl the information, there's not really a whole bunch else you can do unless you start getting access to private data sets. And right, your example of one is a good example of, okay, that's to me going to be where a lot of this next version of AI goes, which is as they start getting access to or licensing access to special training data and creating submodels or vertical models. If you have a creative data set like MediaRadar, which is an example of something you guys could be doing, but also I think across the ad industry, I think we're going to be looking at what is audience data and how does that inform AI? And you start
100%.
going back to what do the next generation of ad networks look like, and what is curate? Is curation just another way of describing that? And it's like 2006 all over again. All of us from the Gen 1 AdNet days are going to suddenly become popular and interesting again, instead of like stuck in the corner at every ad conference. So I think that's an interesting aspect to where do some of these assets and ideas go, and what's old is new again. I think we're going to see this big push over the next couple of years.
100%. You think about the idea of curation, like we're approaching a moment in time where we can curate the audience, we can curate the inventory, and we can curate the actual ad asset itself. And you think about that holy grail of bringing all three together, that's an amazing performance and ROI for brands.
I think one of the other interesting aspects that I've run into in the past, which is with the rise of programmatic, creative really got pushed to the side. It was like how being about fast and cheap
Yeah.
and so forth. Like I have a lot of acquaintances in the creative agency side, and I was really astounded to learn like why are these creatives so off or so bad at times? And they're like, Todd, you have no idea. We're never told the media plan. We're never told the media budgets. Like we're pulled in 72 hours. I need these assets. Why aren't they? No one ever told us, right? As part of the media planning around that, like the creative plan was like this afterthought in a lot of ways. And I
Yeah.
think this is going to be one of the interesting aspects of your comment to me. One of the interesting things is 50% of the performance of ads can be tied to the creative. I think like you just made the day of every creative who's going to be watching this in terms of you're going to see that that'll be now a quote in every one of their presentations to their clients of 50% of the
Yeah.
value of your campaign is going to be the creative.
Yeah. But when CPMs and RTBs are pennies on the dollar, it doesn't matter. But I think as the price of like digital inventory rises and we start to really truly understand the value of that audience and it starts to become, and you can think about a tradable currency there, you realize, okay, yes, cheap eyeballs is what drove RTB. But as prices kind of start to normalize, now it's how do I differentiate? It's not just about race to the bottom on the cheapest kind of eyeball. It's now how do I actually have meaningful communication at that moment?
You even see this retail media. There is no such thing as commodity. Audiences are different and have different values. And one of the fascinating things with retail media, which maybe helps that, which is the closed loop attribution. And
Yeah.
suddenly you can say these audiences are actually really valuable, and therefore you need to pay more for them because they are valuable, and you can tie it to an actual funnel and action. I think that's one of the things that starts to change is our ability to value the audiences and media, and actually to the creative. You can help start to value creatives in a way that hasn't really been done, and therefore why it was de-emphasized and last minute and cheapest and whatever versus trying to figure out what was good and what was valuable.
And realize too that I can curate a different creative for Tom versus a creative for Matt or a creative for Todd. That all motivates us to go make a purchase.
Yeah, I mean, I think where I was trying to butt in before was like, oh, like when we were at Quotient, we bought a sponsored search capability, but what we really wanted was what Criteo bought, was Storytail. And Storytail at the time, they had sponsored product listings with a cool display ad connected to it. And I think that was early. I don't think that the infrastructure was there to be able to pair a creative with that because nobody had those assets. They didn't have assets that would fit that product. And so now you need to be in a Gen AI world or whatever, where you can just bring that in, and it doesn't even have to be a flat image. It could be slightly emotive or whatever. Like that, it just wasn't ready. And I think to your point, Todd, on how are we looking at the creative brief wasn't a creative brief. It was like males 18 to 35. It was the TV ads got creative briefs, but the digital ads didn't have anything. It was just what's the targeting.
Yeah. The one thing I think about with retail media, we talk about the idea of curating audiences. I think the one thing we haven't truly tackled though, or come to grips with, is that most audiences are highly promiscuous. Do you know what I mean?
Are you talking about the fact that your mom has many loyalty cards? Is that what you're talking about?
Oh, I'm talking about the fact that when you think about a consumer, like none of us only shop at Walmart.
Yeah.
None of us
Yeah.
only shop at Amazon. Like we actually shop at Dwayne Reed. We go to Walgreens. We go to Target. we actually spend money across many different retail outlets. And so
Yeah, and Stop and Shop has no idea that I have a dog because I would never buy dog food in a store. I would
yeah,
always get it delivered from
you always
Amazon.
get delivered.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And so I think one of the things that we have to start to grapple with in the world of retail media is how do we deal with and account for highly promiscuous shoppers that are willing to go shop at a different store because there's a better price, or I'm only getting my dog food from chewy.com because it shows up on my front doorstep.
Yep.
And so if you think about that multimodal kind of behavior that audiences have, and if I'm a brand, I want to make sure I reach Tom the best way I can in the most effective way and also the most affordable way. And I don't want to have to pay for you twice. I don't want to
Yep.
go to Walmart's media network to reach Tom and then go to Target's.
Well, yeah. Let's talk about Walmart's media network. So if I'm a MediaRadar customer, and a lot of brands are looking at how do I work with retail media network by network through a full ad network, like whatever that approach ends up being, I think they feel like they're at a loss because they don't have either the data or the data science resources to actually come to the right decisions fast enough. Is MediaRadar somebody that helps somebody with their approach towards retail media networks like a Walmart Connect? Or
Yeah, we certainly provide a lot of the advertising intelligence on those channels and on those formats. If anything, if you think about the emergence of co-creatives, so when I might have an ad campaign for a new Huffy bicycle. I don't know if Huffy is making bikes anymore, but I remember like being a young kid going to, you guys remember Hills, the department store?
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I remember I got my first Huffy bike at Hills. And I remember that, I don't know why I remember this, but I remember they had the print circular. You guys remember that, like the paper circular? And I remember it came into the mailbox. I lived in Pittsburgh and it came into our mailbox. And there was like an ad on the front that was for Hills department store. And they had a Huffy bike on sale for, I can't even remember the price. It was nowhere close today. It was like $15 or $20.
You're not that old. Come
I'm
on.
not that old, but it
It
was
was
like
probably 50. It was probably $50.
Yeah.
probably
75.
$50. Let's try to get some facts into the story, or at least approximate truths. But I remember seeing that, and that in many ways, if you think about that ad, what motivated me was like, I want to go get a Huffy bike, and I need to go buy it at Hills. And so if you think about how creative and retail media has evolved today, we're now doing the same thing, but in a digital format that says not only is this an ad to go buy Coca-Cola or Tide or whatever it might be, it's actually go buy it at Walmart, right? And understanding how that retail logo and that co-branding drives an action, and what the rise in the percentage of ad units that are actually starting to call out retailers in their ads is certainly an interesting part of understanding, like, does that actually improve the effectiveness and the performance of the ad and the campaign?
You also speak to one of the interesting things. Again, what is old is new again. You just described co-op advertising, right? That's what coupons were. The original form of the Sunday Circular was the original form of co-op advertising, and what's turned into direct mail as that took off in the 80s as the original, one of the original databases. My father-in-law wrote mailing list management software for a living, which was about mailing catalogs by retailers and circulars and things like that. Yeah, that was what you hear him tell stories about printer drivers and how bad they are, and the bane of his existence is hilarious in a really geeky, really specific way. Anyway, complete aside, I think when you look at that old is new, it's right. Ad networks are coming back because they serve a purpose around curation and advertising and reach and scale, which second and third tier retailers don't have. The idea of co-op advertising, right? Retailer plus brand, and the ability to do that. And again, I think Gen AI is going to make that a lot easier and a lot better and doable. Whereas I think that was one of the challenges with online media. If the CPMs are so low, it's hard to justify investing in creative. And then suddenly this co-op stuff becomes hard. And so I think that's helpful in that regard.
Yeah, we see it in our data at MediaRadar that we see the growth and emergence of like just more complex cooperative ad units, right? Where we see more of those taglines of, hey, one example is like, hey, come purchase at our store and use Venmo. That's a form of cooperative advertising.
Right.
Right. And you're seeing much more of that show up in the advertising ecosystem, where it really is this like ecosystem of parties and players that are trying to say, hey, how do we bundle together that cooperative view of, I have a vested interest in driving this messaging, you have a vested interest in driving this messaging, and how do we collaborate at scale?
So actually, that brings up a really interesting one that was very vexing to the retail media networks back in the day, because it was seemed like this awesome opportunity, but it's like that meme where you're being pulled back by reality. Is the sort of non-endemic travel advertisers, financial advertisers, is that something that Media Radar is potentially better positioned to help out with? Because the endemics, it's really, they've had those JBPs with the retailers forever. Are the guys who are the outside trying to look in on the retail data world, is that where Media Radar might be a player?
We certainly would have a lot of the intelligence around what the non-endemic players, where they're spending. In many ways, I like to say our job is to provide the intelligence for advertising and where spending is moving and what the movers and shakers in the industry are and how trends are shifting. But we're not in the business of making recommendations of saying, go spend here, go spend there. Well, that's the world of the measurement providers who want to do attribution and lift. They often use a lot of our data to go out and say, here's what it was worth. But our business is being the experts in building the data sets and building the metadata, making metadata sexy around advertising.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Is there anything else we can help you get out into the ether? Now, you're new CEO over at Media Radar. Is there anything else you want to tell us?
No, we're going to continue to invest and evolve our business. We really look at ourselves as being that omni-channel kind of leader in advertising intelligence, really demystifying ad spend across any format, any channel, and as many attributes as we can start to classify. So we really think that advertising kind of metadatabase really is a really important part of the ecosystem to help us all become more effective, more efficient, and more programmatic, and really bring back the value and demonstrate the value of creatives and why they're so critical at driving sales and driving ultimately performance.
Great. Well, thanks, Matt. It was great. Great catching up.
Yeah, likewise. Appreciate it.
Hey, thank you for making it to the end of the podcast. If you haven't already subscribed to The Middlemen, the easiest way to find us is to go to LinkedIn, search for The Middlemen Podcast, and follow us, because in all of our posts, we will share links to the episodes on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. And we'd love for you to rate us on any of those services if you're so inclined. Thank you again for listening, and we will see you next time.